Clean it with your tongue, Evelyn commanded. A sob caught in Grace's throat. Humiliation and fear warred in her eyes. Slowly, with her entire body trembling uncontrollably, she began to lower her head toward the muddy designer shoe. But before we see what happens next, we have to ask, do you believe any child, should ever be treated this way? If you believe every person deserves to be treated with basic human dignity, hit that subscribe button for blissful whispers right now. Only people who think it's okay to bully the helpless would just scroll on by. Just as Grace's head dipped low, a voice, deep and calm but carrying an undeniable weight of authority, cut through the air. What's happening here? The voice was not loud, but it stopped everything. Evelyn froze, her snarl vanishing as if erased. Grace stopped trembling, her gaze lifting from the muddy shoe. Faith and Hope snapped their heads toward the entrance of the Beaumont. A man stood there, framed by the glowing doorway, a silhouette against the store's brilliant interior light. He stepped out from the threshold and the rain seemed to part for him, though he carried no umbrella. He was tall, with hair the color of salt and pepper, impeccably styled. A gray suit, tailored with such precision it seemed a part of him, spoke of quiet, effortless wealth. He wasn't flashy, he was substantial, solid as the city's bedrock. But it was his eyes, a piercing, intelligent blue, that held all the power. They swept over the scene in a single comprehensive glance. The terrified triplets, the furious manager, the small muddy footprint on the expensive shoe, and Evelyn's hand still clamped onto a child's arm. Evelyn's fingers flew open as if the man's gaze had burned her. "Mr. Cole," she exclaimed, her voice suddenly high and sycophantic. The change was instantaneous and jarring. She straightened her posture, smoothing down her dress in a futile attempt to regain her composure. "Sir, I was just handling a situation. These trespassers were harassing customers and creating a scene." Ethan Cole's eyes remained fixed on her, unmoved by her panicked explanation. He took another deliberate step forward, his expensive leather shoes making no sound on the wet pavement. He ignored her words, his focus entirely on what he had just witnessed. "A scene?" he repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. He looked from the tear tracks on Grace's face to the shoe on Evelyn's foot, then back to Evelyn. "You were handling it by forcing a hungry child to lick your shoe?" Evelyn's carefully painted smile faltered. A flicker of panic entered her eyes as she searched for a defense. "They're filthy, Mr. Cole. They were making the storefront look like a slum. It's my job to protect the brand, to maintain the standards the Beaumont is known for. I was just—" "Your job," Ethan interrupted, his calm demeanor finally cracking to reveal a foundation of cold fury, "was to manage a store, Evelyn. Not to torture children." He took a step closer, and for the first time, Evelyn seemed to shrink under his gaze. The difference in their power was no longer just professional, it was moral, and it was absolute. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He delivered his next words with the quiet finality of a judge passing sentence. "You're fired." The two words hung in the rainy air, more shocking than a shout. Evelyn's mouth fell open. All the color drained from her face, leaving her bright red lipstick looking garish and absurd. "What?" she stammered. "But, sir, I've worked here for 5 years. I'm the best manager this flagship store has ever had. You can't just—" "I can and I do," Ethan said, cutting her off without a trace of hesitation. His blue eyes were like chips of ice. "What you did was not just unprofessional, it was inhumane. That isn't a standard I will ever tolerate in any of my businesses. We don't treat people this way. We certainly don't treat children this way." He gave a slight nod toward the gleaming doors. "Get your personal things from your office. Security will escort you out." For a moment, Evelyn just stared, her mind refusing to compute. Then her shock curdled into pure, unadulterated rage. Her face, a moment ago pale, now flooded with a blotchy, furious red. Without another word, she spun on her heel and stormed back into the Beaumont, her departure as graceless and ugly as her behavior. The heavy glass door swung shut behind her, sealing her out of their world for good. And just like that, a moment of justice. Evelyn got what was coming to her, but we know the fight is far from over. If you were cheering when Ethan fired her, go down to the comments right now and type, "Everyone deserves respect," to show you're not on the side of the bullies. Let's see how many of us stand for what's right. With Evelyn gone, the tense silence was broken only by the steady drumming of the rain on the awning. The icy fury in Ethan Cole's eyes melted away, replaced by a look of profound sadness and concern. He turned his full attention to the three small girls who were still huddled together, watching him with wide, uncertain eyes. Slowly, deliberately, he knelt down on the wet pavement, not caring in the slightest about the fine gray wool of his trousers. The simple act brought him down to their level, transforming him from an imposing figure of authority into a gentle guardian. His voice, when he finally spoke, was soft. "Are you three okay?" They didn't answer with words but gave a small, collective nod, their hands still clutched tightly together. He could see the exhaustion in their faces, the slight tremor of cold that ran through their tiny bodies. "You look cold and hungry," he said gently. "Would you like to come inside where it's warm? I promise I can get you something to eat." Faith, the bravest of the three, looked at her sisters, a silent question passing between them. Hope and Grace gave her the slightest of nods. Turning back to the kind man kneeling before them, she made her decision. "Yes, please," she whispered, her voice clear despite her shivering. "Thank you, sir." Ethan smiled, a genuine warmth reaching his eyes for the first time. He rose to his feet and extended a hand. After a moment's hesitation, Faith placed her small, cold hand in his large, warm one. Together, the billionaire and the three tattered triplets walked through the gleaming glass doors of the Beaumont, stepping into a world that had only moments before so viciously cast them out. The journey from the front door of the Beaumont to Ethan Cole's private office was like a silent parade. Shoppers, draped in designer clothes and dripping with jewels, stopped mid-sentence, their mouths agape. Sales associates, trained to be paragons of discreet professionalism, froze in place, their eyes wide with disbelief. They stared at the surreal procession, their enigmatic, formidable owner, Mr. Cole, walking with a calm, protective air, his hand holding that of a small, bedraggled girl, who in turn was holding the hand of her identical sister, who was holding the hand of the third. The three girls, with their wet, curly hair and tattered clothes, were a stark, poignant stain on the pristine white marble of the showroom floor. Whispers followed them like a wake, but Ethan paid them no mind. His focus was entirely on the small, cold hand held in his. His office was his sanctuary, a quiet retreat from the relentless demands of his empire. It was located at the back of the store, a corner suite with a floor-to-ceiling window that offered a breathtaking, panoramic view of the Chicago skyline. The room was furnished with a large mahogany desk, deep leather armchairs, and shelves filled with books on art and architecture. It was a space that spoke of power, taste, and solitude. Today, for the first time, it felt like it was about to become something else entirely. "Here we are," Ethan said gently, closing the heavy oak door behind them, shutting out the rest of the world. The sudden quiet was a relief. "Let's get you three warmed up." He led them toward a plush leather sofa that faced the window. He disappeared for a moment into a small private washroom, returning with three thick, fluffy towels that smelled faintly of cedar. With a tenderness that would have shocked anyone who knew him only by his ruthless business reputation, he began to gently dry their hair and daub at their damp clothes. The girls were stiff at first, and used to such gentle treatment from a stranger, but the simple, paternal act of care, combined with the enveloping warmth of the towels, began to soothe their frayed nerves. They huddled together on the expensive sofa, three small figures wrapped in white cotton, looking utterly out of place but finally undeniably safe. Ethan pressed a button on his desk intercom. "Helen," he said, his voice smooth and calm. Could you please have the kitchen send up 3 hot chocolates and some simple sandwiches? Turkey and cheese perhaps. And bring them yourself. A moment later, a kind-faced woman in her late 50s entered with a tray. She placed it on the low-slung table in front of the sofa, her eyes betraying a flicker of profound curiosity, but she said nothing, offering only a warm, maternal smile to the children before exiting as quietly as she came. The girls, who had likely not seen a proper meal in days, ate with a quiet, desperate hunger. Ethan sat in one of the leather armchairs opposite them, watching. He felt a strange pull, a sense of inexplicable familiarity that went beyond simple sympathy. There was something in the determined way Faith protected her sisters, in the gentle, dreamy look in Hope's eyes, and in the quiet, observant nature of little Grace. He saw more than 3 hungry children. He saw distinct, vibrant personalities budding even in the harshest of conditions. "Those are beautiful names," Ethan said gently after they had introduced themselves between bites of sandwich. "Faith, Hope, and Grace. Very fitting." He smiled and was struck by the way Grace's mouth turned up at the corners. It was a mirror of his own mother's smile, a sight he hadn't seen in over a decade. He shook the thought away, an odd coincidence. "You said your mother is sick. Where is she now?" "She's at home," Faith explained, her role as spokesperson firmly established. "She told us to go find help because the cupboards were empty." The simple, brutal honesty of the statement landed like a punch in Ethan's gut. He leaned forward, trying to keep his tone casual, a simple protector gathering information. "What's your mother's name?" It was Hope who answered this time, her voice soft and muffled by a mouthful of sandwich. "Clara Evans," she said. The world stopped. The air left Ethan's lungs in a silent rush. The sandwich he had been about to place on a plate for himself paused midway, his hand frozen in space. Clara Evans. It wasn't a name. It was an echo from a life he had buried long ago, a ghost that had haunted the quietest corners of his heart for years. He hadn't heard that name, hadn't dared to even think it in nearly 7 years. Images, sharp and painful, flooded his mind. Clara, with her bright, intelligent eyes and a laugh that could fill the cavernous halls of his Lincoln Park mansion with more warmth than any fireplace. Her sneaking into his study late at night, their relationship a secret kept from his disapproving family and the world. He remembered the scent of jasmine she always wore, the feel of her hand in his during a stolen walk in the gardens. And then the silence. The day she had simply vanished. No note, no goodbye. Her room was empty, her wages for the month left untouched on the dresser. He had spent a fortune trying to find her, hiring private investigators who turned up nothing but dead ends. She had disappeared from the face of the earth, taking a piece of him with her. He snapped back to the present, his heart hammering against his ribs. He looked at the 3 girls on his sofa, but he saw them differently now. He wasn't just looking, he was scrutinizing, searching. He saw Clara in the elegant shape of their eyes and the rich, dark curls of their hair. But then he saw something else. He saw the stubborn, determined set of Faith's chin and felt a jolt of recognition. It was his own. He saw the slight cleft in Hope's chin, the same one he saw in the mirror every morning when he shaved. And Grace's smile. It was his mother's smile, an undeniable genetic heirloom. His mind raced, desperately trying to connect the pieces. She had left 7 years ago. No, the affair was then, but when did she actually leave? Was it closer to 5? The details blurred in the sudden fog of shock, but the horrifying, beautiful, impossible truth began to crystallize. The girls were 4 years old. A secret pregnancy. A woman running away not from him, but perhaps for him, to protect him from a scandal that would have destroyed his burgeoning career. It was the only explanation. The only thing that made sense of her complete and total disappearance. These weren't just hungry children who had stumbled to his store by chance. They weren't just the daughters of a long-lost love. Ethan Cole slumped back into his chair, the full weight of the revelation hitting him like a physical blow. 1,000 emotions, shock, regret, terror, and a fierce, unexpected wave of joy, crashed over him at once. He stared at the three identical girls who had finished their sandwiches and were now sipping their hot chocolate, completely oblivious to the fact they had just found their father, and in doing so, had just completely and utterly detonated his entire world. For a long moment, Ethan Cole remained frozen in his armchair, the revelation echoing in the sudden, deafening silence of his mind. My daughters. The two words replayed over and over, each repetition sending a fresh shockwave through him. He stared at the girls on the sofa, and his entire life, the meticulously constructed empire, the lonely mansion, the years of relentless ambition, all of it felt like a fragile mirage that had just evaporated. This was real. The three of them, with their mother's eyes and his chin, were the only thing that was real. A sound, small and insignificant, shattered his paralysis. It was a cough coming from little Grace. It wasn't a simple tickle in the throat. It was a dry, chesty hack that sounded far too harsh coming from such a small body. The sound was a trigger, a brutal reminder that connected his cataclysmic discovery to a present, mortal danger. Pneumonia. A terrible cough. In bed for many days. The girl's words from earlier came rushing back, but now they weren't just a sad story. They were a ticking clock. The shock that had immobilized him instantly transmuted into a white-hot surge of adrenaline. The calculated billionaire vanished, replaced by something far more primal. A father terrified of losing a family he had only just found. He was on his feet in a single, fluid motion, the armchair creaking in protest. He crossed the room and knelt before them again, his movements now charged with an electric urgency. His eyes, intense and focused, met Faith's. Faith, listen to me, he said, his voice low and steady, but laced with a new, urgent command. This is very important. I need to help your mommy right now. I need to know where you live. Can you tell me your address? The girls seemed to sense the shift in him, the new gravity in the air. They looked at each other, and then Faith, with the solemnity of a general relaying vital intelligence, recited a street name and an apartment number. It was an address on the west side, in a neighborhood he knew only as a place his car sped through on the way to the airport, a world away from the manicured lawns of his Lincoln Park home. The moment Faith finished speaking, Ethan was already pulling his phone from his suit pocket. His thumb flew across the screen, his movements precise and economical. The first call was to his driver. Marcus, bring the Maybach to the front entrance. Now, he said, his voice leaving no room for questions. I'm sending you an address on the west side. We need to be there 10 minutes ago. Get us there as fast as the law allows and then faster. This is the most important drive of your life. He ended the call without waiting for a reply and immediately dialed another number. Alistair, he said, the name sharp. I have a medical emergency. No, not me. A woman. Name is Clara Evans. He began ushering the girls off the sofa, grabbing his own overcoat from a stand by the door. Suspected advanced pneumonia, untreated for at least 2 weeks. She's in a bad way. I need you to meet me at this address. He recited the location Faith had given him. Bring your full house call kit. I mean everything, antibiotics for fluids, a portable oxygen tank. Whatever you need to treat someone on the brink. Drop whatever you're doing. There's no time. He hung up and hit the intercom button one last time, his voice directed at his assistant. Helen, cancel all my appointments for the rest of the day. He paused, looking at the 3 small faces staring up at him. Actually, cancel them for the rest of the week. Indefinitely. I'll call you. He didn't wait for her shocked reply. He helped the girls with their towels, draping them over their shoulders like makeshift capes against the cold that awaited them outside. The second journey through the store was nothing like the first. Where before there had been a stunned silence, now there was a frantic energy. Ethan moved with the speed and focus of a man possessed, his long strides forcing the girls into a near run to keep up. The employees who saw him, a man known for his glacial composure, now striding through his own store with a wild, haunted look in his eyes, knew that something fundamental had just broken in their boss's world. The gleaming black Maybach was already idling at the curb, Marcus holding the rear door open. Ethan bundled the girls inside, his hands surprisingly gentle as he buckled each of them into the plush leather seats. He slid in beside them and slammed the door. "Go, Marcus. Go." The car surged into the Chicago traffic, the opulent storefronts of the magnificent mile blurring into a rain-streaked smear of light and color. As the vehicle sped west, the city's landscape began to transform. Gleaming skyscrapers of glass and steel gave way to sturdy towers of brick and stone, which in turn yielded to low-slung buildings and the gritty, weathered facades of working-class neighborhoods. Ethan stared blankly out the window, but he wasn't seeing the city. His mind was a maelstrom of regret and terror. 7 years. The number was a physical weight, crushing the air from his lungs. He had missed 7 years of their lives. First words, first steps, birthdays, scraped knees, bedtime stories, an entire childhood multiplied by 3 had happened without him. And now, the woman who had single-handedly navigated that impossible life was dying in a cold apartment, while he had been sitting in his glass tower, building an empire that suddenly felt like a pile of worthless dust. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through his guilt. What if he was too late? What if he had finally found them, only to lose the one person who connected all the pieces, the woman he had once loved? The car sped on, a dark vessel racing through the rainy city, carrying a desperate man towards a ghost he prayed he could still save. The Maybach, a silent black phantom of wealth and power, slid to a stop in front of a building that seemed to sag with the weight of its own existence. It was a tired, 3-story brick walk-up on a block where every other building looked just the same. Rainwater pooled in the cracked pavement, and the gray, weeping sky seemed to press down on the neighborhood, smothering it in a blanket of gloom. The contrast between Ethan's vehicle and their destination was so profound it was almost violent. This wasn't just another part of the city, it was another world, one governed by a different, harsher set of rules. Ethan turned to the 3 small girls in the back seat, their wide eyes taking in the unfamiliar surroundings. "I want you to stay here with Marcus," he said, his voice soft but firm. "He'll keep the doors locked and you'll be safe and warm. I'm going to go get Mommy. I'll be right back, I promise." He received 3 solemn nods in return. He stepped out of the car, the cold, damp air hitting him at once. He shrugged on his overcoat and took a deep breath, like a diver preparing to plunge into dark, uncertain waters. The front door of the building had a broken lock that had been defeated long ago. It swung inward with a low groan, revealing a dimly lit, narrow hallway that smelled of damp concrete and boiled cabbage. A single fluorescent light flickered overhead, casting long, dancing shadows that made the space feel alive and menacing. He found the stairs, their wooden treads worn into smooth concaves by a century of use, and took them 2 at a time. He found apartment 3B at the end of the hall on the top floor. The paint on the door was peeling and the brass numbers were tarnished with age. He stood before it for a fraction of a second, his heart pounding a heavy, frantic rhythm against his ribs. Every instinct, every fiber of his being, was screaming at the unknown that lay on the other side of that thin wooden door. He raised his hand to knock, then hesitated. Listening closely, he could hear nothing. No television, no voices, nothing. A cold dread washed over him. He reached out and tried the knob. It turned easily in his hand. The door was unlocked. He pushed it open and stepped inside. The apartment was tiny, little more than a small living area with a kitchenette tucked into one corner, and a single closed door that presumably led to the bedroom. But what struck Ethan immediately was that it wasn't a place of squalor. It was meticulously clean. The few pieces of furniture, a threadbare sofa, a small wobbly table with 3 mismatched chairs, were old but cared for. A colorful crayon drawing of 3 smiling stick figures and a yellow sun was taped proudly to the peeling paint of one wall. On the back of the sofa, 3 tiny worn-out sweaters were folded in a neat pile. It was a home built not with money, but with a fierce and determined love. And it was freezing. The air was unnervingly cold and still, the kind of deep chill that comes when a heater has been off for days. A sound, faint and strained, drew his attention to the closed door. It was the sound of breathing, a ragged, shallow noise that was more of a struggle than a rhythm. Dread coiling in his stomach, Ethan pushed the bedroom door open. The room was even smaller and colder than the last. The only furniture was a single bed, a small nightstand and a dresser. And on the bed, buried under a thin blanket, was Clara. The sight of her buckled his knees. The vibrant, laughing woman from his memories was gone, replaced by a fragile, skeletal figure. Her beautiful face, once so full of life, was now gaunt and hollowed out. Her skin stretched taut over her cheekbones and gleaming with the terrifying sheen of a raging fever. Her breath hitched in her chest, each inhalation a painful, rattling effort. She was far sicker than he had imagined. This wasn't just pneumonia. This was a woman wasting away, on the very edge of existence. A wave of guilt so profound it was nauseating washed over him. While he had been closing multi-million-dollar deals, she had been here, alone, fighting for her life in the cold. He rushed to her side, his movements now clumsy with a desperate urgency. He knelt beside the bed, which dipped under his weight. "Clara?" he whispered, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name. He reached out and took her hand. It was limp and burning hot. "Clara, it's Ethan. I'm here." He wasn't sure if she could hear him, if she was even aware of his presence. He squeezed her hand gently, trying to will his own strength into her. "Clara, listen to me. The girls, I found them. They're safe. They're outside in my car. They're warm and they've eaten. They're safe, Clara." At the mention of her daughters, something changed. A faint flicker of movement behind her closed eyelids. Her breathing, which had been shallow and erratic, seemed to steady for a moment. With an immense, agonizing effort, her eyes slowly opened. They were cloudy with fever and unfocused at first, drifting around the room before finally landing on his face. For a second there was nothing. Then a spark. A flicker of recognition in their depths. Her dry, cracked lips parted. Then. The name was a ghost of a sound, a dry, rasping whisper. "I'm here, Clara. Save your strength. My doctor is on his way." But she seemed desperate, as if she knew this might be her only chance. She squeezed his hand with what little strength she had. "I never wanted to leave." A terrible, body-racking cough seized her, and Ethan thought he was losing her. But she fought through it, her eyes locking onto his with a searing intensity. "It was your mother?" She forced out, the words tearing from her throat. Her eyes were wide, not with fever, but with the memory of some past horror. That was all. The effort was too much. The light in her eyes extinguished. Her body went completely limp, her head falling to the side. Her hand, which had been gripping his with such purpose, fell slack. She was gone, lost to the darkness of unconsciousness. Ethan knelt there in the freezing, silent room, her unfinished sentence hanging in the air like a curse, leaving him with a fragment of a truth more poisonous than any lie. Humiliation was a physical sensation, a toxic, burning acid churning in Evelyn Reed's stomach. She sat in her pristine, minimalist apartment, a space as cold and meticulously ordered as her own heart, but the order around her offered no comfort. The silence was a mockery, amplifying the echo of Ethan Cole's words, "You're fired." She had replayed the scene 100 times in the last hour, each viewing stoking the fires of her rage. He had not just dismissed her, he had dismantled her. He had stripped her of her power, her identity, and her dignity in front of the entire world, and for what? For a trio of street rats, for a piece of human garbage that had dared to soil her shoe. She picked up a heavy crystal vase from her coffee table, a ridiculously expensive piece she had bought to celebrate her 5-year anniversary at the Beaumont, and hurled it against the opposite wall. It shattered with a satisfyingly violent crash, the sound of brief, inadequate release for the storm raging inside her. This wasn't just about a job. She had given her life to that store, sacrificing evenings, weekends, and relationships to ascend to her managerial throne. She had been his most loyal soldier, enforcing his standards with a ruthless efficiency she knew he secretly admired. And he had cast her aside without a second thought. Her fury began to cool, hardening into something far more dangerous: resolve. A wrongful termination lawsuit was the path of a common, pathetic victim. It was slow, boring, and would be buried by Cole's army of corporate lawyers. No, that wouldn't do. She didn't want compensation. She wanted annihilation. She wanted to see his perfect, carefully curated world burn. She wanted to take the one thing he valued more than his money, his pristine public reputation, his image as a compassionate, morally upright leader, and shatter it into a million pieces. She would turn his own supposed morality into a weapon and use it to slit his throat. A name surfaced in her mind, a name whispered in disgruntled circles of the rich and powerful. A digital bogeyman. Not a journalist from some legacy newspaper bound by ethics and standards, but a predator who operated in the murky depths of the internet. A man who had built his own empire by tearing down others. His name was Julian Croft, and his website, The Croft Report, was a graveyard of reputations. He was a digital assassin, a specialist in character assassination who wielded allegations like a sharpened blade. Evelyn's lips curled into a venomous smile. She walked over to her laptop, shards of crystal crunching under her heel, and found his secure contact page. The decision was made. The war had begun. She picked up her phone and dialed the number. A man's voice, smooth and laced with a cynical sort of amusement, answered on the second ring. Croft. Evelyn took a steadying breath, her voice pure ice. Mr. Croft, my name is Evelyn Reed. Until about an hour ago, I was the flagship manager of the Beaumont. I have a story for you about its owner, Ethan Cole. A story that will burn his empire to the ground. They met 2 hours later in a dark, leather-bound corner of the Aviary, a high-end cocktail bar where secrets were currency and anonymity was guaranteed. Julian Croft didn't look like a typical journalist. He looked like a wolf in a bespoke suit, with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing and a smile that never quite reached them. He was younger than Evelyn expected, maybe late 30s, and radiated a restless, predatory energy. He had made a career of finding the single thread that could unravel the most powerful men, and he had an unerring instinct for where to pull. He ordered a complex, smoke-infused cocktail and listened, his expression a mask of professional boredom. "So you were fired," he said when she had finished her initial, sanitized summary of the day's events. He took a slow sip of his drink, his eyes appraising her over the rim of the glass. "Ms. Reed, I get a dozen calls a week from people who were fired. They all think their boss is the devil incarnate. They all want revenge. Why is your story different?" Evelyn was not flustered. This was the test, and she was prepared. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a low, confidential tone that was both conspiratorial and deeply convincing. "Because this isn't about me losing my job, Mr. Croft. This is about a pattern of behavior. It's about a man, a public saint, who believes his power and his money put him above all consequence, especially with his female employees." She began to weave her masterpiece of deceit. She spoke of her years of unwavering loyalty to Ethan Cole and the Beaumont, painting herself as the consummate professional. Then she carefully, artfully introduced the poison. She spoke of lingering glances after board meetings, unnecessary late-night calls to her personal cell, and casual invitations for drinks that were anything but casual. She presented herself as a woman skillfully navigating a powerful man's inappropriate advances for years, all to protect the career she had built. "I always managed to deflect," she said, a note of feigned weariness in her voice. "I made excuses, kept things professional. But today he was more direct. I finally had to give him a firm and unequivocal no. And within the hour, he manufactured a ridiculous, baseless reason to have me terminated and thrown out of the building." Julian Croft set his glass down, the bored look on his face replaced by a flicker of genuine interest. He leaned forward, his elbows on the table, the hunter scenting a trail. The narrative was perfect. The beloved billionaire with a secret dark side, the brave subordinate who paid the price for her integrity. It was the kind of story that could dominate the news cycle for weeks. "It's a powerful narrative, Evelyn," he said, using her first name to create a false intimacy. "But right now it's a he said, she said. And he's Ethan Cole. To make a story like this stick, I need more than your word. I need an anchor. I need to establish a pattern." A slow, predatory smile spread across Evelyn's face. She had been waiting for this. "An anchor?" she repeated, her voice a purr. "How about the real reason I was fired? The pretext he used?" She then recounted the incident with the 3 little girls. She painted them as filthy nuisances, but focused on the details she knew would intrigue a journalist like Croft. 3 of them, Mr. Croft. Absolutely identical. Couldn't have been older than 4. And when Cole saw them, the way he looked at them, it wasn't just some billionaire playing the Good Samaritan. It was something else entirely. Something personal. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. The specificity of the detail, 3 identical girls, was enough to hook him. It was a strange, memorable fact, the kind of detail that makes a story feel real. While Evelyn continued to speak, Croft was already at work, his fingers flying across his phone screen under the table. He wasn't just a writer. He was a master of information with a vast network of sources, informants, and freelance diggers on his payroll. He sent out a text to a contact, a disgruntled security guard who worked in the building opposite the Beaumont. "Heard anything about 3 identical little girls causing a scene on the Mile today?" Within minutes, a reply came back. The guard had seen them. A few more texts, a promise of a cash transfer, and Croft had the information he was looking for. The girls had been asking for help for their sick mother, a woman named Clara Evans. Julian Croft's expression remained neutral, but his eyes lit up with the thrill of the hunt. He opened a sleek, ultra-thin laptop, his fingers a blur across the keyboard as he ran the name through a series of powerful background check databases. Seconds later he stopped. He stared at the screen, a low whistle escaping his lips. It was too perfect. It was the kind of connection journalists dream of. He turned the laptop around for Evelyn to see. On the screen was a public record search result. Name, Clara Evans. Last listed employment, 2018 housekeeper. Employer, Ethan Cole, Lincoln Park private residence. The final, damning piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Croft leaned back, a look of profound, predatory excitement on his face. "So, let's build the narrative," he said, his voice alive with creative malice. "The all-powerful billionaire Ethan Cole begins an affair with a vulnerable member of his domestic staff. She gets pregnant. To avoid a career-ending scandal, he fires her, pays for her silence, and throws her out on the street." He continued, his words weaving the facts into a tapestry of lies. Years go by. He builds his empire, polishes his saintly reputation, and thinks his dirty little secret is buried forever. Then one day the living, breathing proof of his transgression, his 3 secret daughters, appears on his doorstep. And who is the sole witness to his moment of panic? The one manager who knows him best. The one woman who, as you've told me, has been rejecting his advances for years. He can't afford a witness. So he fires you under the flimsiest of pretexts to guarantee your silence. He closed the laptop with a sharp, definitive snap. His smile was genuine now, and it was terrifying. It's a perfect closed loop. Every piece of evidence supports the lie. This isn't just a story, Evelyn. This is a kill shot. Less than 3 hours later it dropped. Like a digital bomb, the article went live on the Croft Report. The headline was a masterpiece of character assassination, crafted for maximum outrage and immediate viral spread. Ethan Cole's dark secret. Sex, lies, and the 3 children he tried to bury. Beneath it was a meticulously constructed narrative, weaving Evelyn's poisonous testimony with Julian Croft's damning discoveries. It spoke of a disturbing pattern of predatory behavior, citing brave whistleblower Evelyn Reed, who alleged she was fired for refusing Cole's unwanted and persistent advances. The story then pivoted to its anchor. Croft's investigation has uncovered that the mother of the 3 children who appeared outside the Beaumont today, a woman named Clara Evans, was a former maid in Cole's mansion who was mysteriously dismissed from her position nearly 7 years ago, around the time she would have become pregnant. The article was accompanied by a grainy, long-lens photo of the triplets huddled under the awning, their faces blurred, the image a weaponized symbol of Cole's alleged crimes. It didn't just go viral, it was a digital detonation. The hashtag Cole scandal began trending within the hour. The story was ripped from Croft's site and dissected on social media, then picked up by mainstream news blogs who, unable to ignore the firestorm, began reporting on the serious allegations against the billionaire philanthropist. Miles away from this digital inferno, Ethan Cole sat in the sterile silence of a private hospital waiting room. Dr. Finch had arrived at the apartment minutes after Clara's collapse, stabilizing her before having her rushed here by a private ambulance. Clara was now in the ICU, a team of specialists fighting the raging infection in her lungs. The girls, exhausted and confused, were safe in a private suite down the hall with his trusted assistant, Helen, who had brought them new clothes and warm food. Ethan was alone, his entire universe having shrunk to the space between breaths, waiting for any news on Clara's condition. His phone, which he'd silenced hours ago, began to light up. The screen flashed relentlessly with calls from Martha, his head of PR, his corporate legal team, and several members of his board. A tidal wave of texts followed. Annoyed by the intrusion, he ignored them, his focus solely on the closed doors of the ICU. But the sheer, relentless volume of the notifications was impossible to ignore. With a sigh of irritation, he picked up the phone. An alert from a national news network was at the top of his lock screen. He tapped it open. He read the headline first, his brow furrowing in confusion. Then he read the first paragraph, then the second. He saw Evelyn's name, then Clara's, then the mention of his secret daughters. The blood drained from his face. It was a grotesque funhouse mirror version of the truth, every fact twisted into a monstrous lie that painted him as a predator and a villain. The private, desperate fight for Clara's life, a battle he was waging with every fiber of his being, had just been eclipsed by a vicious, public war for his own survival. And he realized with a cold, sickening horror, the enemies at his gate had just turned his own children into their primary ammunition. The hospital waiting room was a sterile, white purgatory. For Ethan, it had become the epicenter of 2 separate wars, each one threatening to annihilate him. On one side were the imposing double doors of the intensive care unit, behind which Clara was fighting for her life, her condition still listed as critical. On the other side was his phone, a sleek black rectangle that had become a portal to a digital inferno. He paced the length of the small room, a caged animal in a bespoke suit. His attempts to control the public relations disaster were proving utterly futile. The story was a living, breathing entity, and it was suffocating him. His head of PR, Martha, was frantic. Ethan, no comment, is being seen as an admission of guilt. The board is demanding a response. The stock is going to hemorrhage when the market opens. We have to say something. His lawyers were giving him the exact opposite advice. Say nothing. Any statement can and will be used against you. We wait. He felt utterly, terrifyingly helpless. He could pour all his money into Clara's medical care, but he couldn't breathe for her. He could hire the best legal team in the country, but he couldn't stop a lie that was spreading with the speed and ferocity of a wildfire. Julian Croft's narrative was diabolically perfect. It was a closed loop. Denying his relationship with Clara would be a lie. Admitting it would be seen as confirmation of the story's core accusation. There was no way out. The walls were closing in, the pressure building with every passing minute. He was running a hand through his hair for the 10th time, his mind a maelstrom of fear and fury, when the waiting room doors slid open. He expected a nurse or perhaps his assistant Helen with an update on the girls. Instead, he was met with the one person he was least prepared to face: his mother. Elizabeth Cole glided into the room, her posture ramrod straight, her silver hair styled in an impeccable chignon. She wore a Chanel tweed suit and a look of profound, aristocratic disapproval. There was no warmth in her eyes, no maternal comfort in her presence. She looked at the sterile waiting room and the haggard state of her son as if they were a personal insult to her. Her arrival was not a cavalry charge of support. It was an inspection, a damage assessment. And Ethan knew with a sudden, chilling certainty that she was not here to help him. She was here to manage him. "Ethan, what is this unmitigated disaster?" Elizabeth Cole asked, her voice as crisp and cold as the starched collar of her blouse. There was no preamble, no "how are you?" no acknowledgement of the life and death struggle happening rooms away. "The chairman of the board has called my personal line twice in the last hour. Your name, the Cole family name, is being dragged through the gutter on every gossip blog and news site. Explain yourself." A hot surge of resentment flared in Ethan's chest, but it was quickly extinguished by a new, desperate thought. It was an audacious, impossibly risky idea, but as he looked at his mother's cold, arrogant face, he realized it was the only move he had left. She saw this situation not as a tragedy, but as a problem of optics, a mess that needed her expert management. Her fatal flaw was her unshakable belief that she was always the smartest person in the room, and he was about to use that against her. She mistook his silence for weakness. "Look at you," she said with a sigh of disappointment. "Falling apart. This is because of that girl, isn't it? The maid. I warned you, Ethan. I told you she was beneath you, that she would bring nothing but trouble." While she spoke, Ethan casually pulled his phone from his pocket, as if to check a text message he had missed. His movements were fluid and natural. He placed the phone screen down on the small table that separated their chairs, a seemingly idle gesture. But beneath the table, hidden from her sight, his thumb swiped across the screen and tapped the small red icon of the voice recorder app. The gamble was made. The trap was set. He looked up at her, letting all the genuine exhaustion and desperation he felt show on his face. He scrubbed a hand over his eyes, playing the part of the overwhelmed son she expected him to be. "I don't know what to do, Mother," he said, his voice a convincing imitation of defeat. "This story. Evelyn's story, it's a lie, but it's everywhere. They're using those children against me. They're calling me a monster." He let his shoulders slump, a portrait of a powerful man brought to his knees. He was feeding her ego, surrendering the field to her, inviting the matriarch to come and fix the mess her broken son had made. Seeing her son so thoroughly defeated, Elizabeth Cole's posture straightened with a renewed sense of purpose. This was familiar territory. She was taking control, correcting a mistake, pruning a branch to save the tree. "A monster? Don't be theatrical, Ethan," she said, her voice laced with dismissive authority. "You're a Cole. This is a public relations nuisance born from your sentimentality. It's a fire that I should have extinguished more permanently years ago." She sat opposite him, the very picture of cold, maternal power. Her tone was not that of a conspirator, but of a CEO patiently explaining a difficult but necessary business decision. "Frankly, I'm not surprised it has come to this," she continued, her voice devoid of any emotion. "It is precisely why I did what I did. You were too emotional back then, too infatuated with the girl to see the existential threat she posed to your future." Ethan remained silent, letting her words fill the sterile air, each one being silently captured by the phone on the table. "You saw a charming young woman," Elizabeth went on, her gaze distant as she recalled her strategy. "I saw a housekeeper from a penniless background who had successfully seduced one of the city's wealthiest bachelors. Don't you see? She was a gold digger, Ethan, playing the long game. She would have ruined you. A scandalous pregnancy, a forced marriage. She would have bled this family and this company for generations. I had to intervene. For your own good. For the legacy your father and I built. She paused, adjusting the cuff of her jacket. Of course I couldn't act directly. That would have been messy. I needed someone on the inside. Someone ambitious, discreet, and who understood which side her bread was buttered on. She looked at Ethan, a flicker of pride in her eyes for her own cunning. That little manager at the Beaumont, Evelyn Reed. She was a junior associate back then, but she was clever. She was the one who first brought your inappropriate fraternization to my attention. She was hungry, eager to please. She was the perfect instrument. Ethan's jaw tightened, but his expression of despair remained fixed. Inside, his world was tilting. Evelyn was always Evelyn. I authorized her to make Clara an offer on my behalf, his mother stated calmly. A very generous severance package. Enough money to set her up for life, anywhere in the country she wanted. All she had to do was sign a non-disclosure agreement, disappear, and never contact you again. It was a clean, merciful solution to a problem that could have destroyed everything you've worked for. Ethan kept his head bowed, forcing a pained expression onto his face. But Mother, the article, he said, his voice strained with calculated despair. Evelyn is the primary source. She's the one claiming I fired her because she rejected me. She's painting herself as a victim. Elizabeth let out a short, unamused laugh, a sound like ice cubes clinking in a glass. Of course she is. The little viper. She was always opportunistic, I'll give her that. She looked down at her son with a patronizing air of wisdom. She was blackmailing me, you know. For years. It was never very much, a nuisance more than a threat. A few $1,000s here, a quiet request for a better title there, that final promotion to manager. It was the price of her continued discretion. The price I was willing to pay to keep your past safely buried. When you fired her today, you severed her income stream and her leverage. This entire story is nothing more than the tantrum of a cornered animal. She stood up then, smoothing down the front of her tweed jacket as she looked down at him, her moral pronouncement delivered. Sometimes, Ethan, to protect what is ours, to protect the family, we must be ruthless. We must make ugly decisions for the greater good. I did what was necessary to protect you and the legacy your father left for you. That girl and the situation she created would have ruined everything. A look of finality settled on her face. Frankly, you should be thanking me for having the strength to do what you could not. As the last self-righteous word left her lips, the double doors to the ICU hissed open. Dr. Finch stepped out, his expression tired but focused. Mr. Cole? We have an update on Ms. Evans. The interruption was perfectly timed. In an instant, Ethan's entire demeanor shifted. He rose to his feet, but the broken, slumped posture was gone. He stood tall, his shoulders squared, the look of despair in his eyes replaced by a cold, hard clarity. Calmly, he reached down and picked up his phone from the table. His thumb moved across the screen, stopping the recording. The tiny red light, the silent witness to his mother's betrayal, vanished. He slipped the phone into the inner pocket of his suit jacket. It felt as heavy and as solid as a loaded gun. He looked at his mother one last time, but it was as if he were looking at a complete stranger. The filial bond that had once tied them together had been irrevocably severed. "Thank you for your honesty, Mother," he said, his voice completely flat, an unnerving void where emotion should have been. "You've been very helpful." Without another word, without a backward glance, he turned his back on her and walked toward the doctor, toward the fight for Clara's life. He left Elizabeth Cole standing alone in the middle of the waiting room, supremely confident that she had once again saved her son from his own weakness, completely and blissfully unaware that she had just handed him the weapon to burn her world and Evelyn's to the ground. The 2 days that followed Clara's collapse were a special kind of hell, a disorienting blur of sterile white walls, the rhythmic beeping of machines, and the incessant, buzzing intrusion of the outside world. Clara's condition had stabilized, a small mercy, but she remained in a medically induced coma to allow her body to fight the infection. The girls, shielded from the hospital's grim realities, were sequestered in a luxury hotel suite with Helen, their world now a strange paradise of room service and cartoons, though their quiet, searching eyes betrayed their deep-seated anxiety. Ethan, meanwhile, was running on fumes, fueled by black coffee and a primal, unrelenting adrenaline. He had handed the recording of his mother's confession to his legal team, expecting it to be a silver bullet. It was not. It was merely the opening salvo in a brutal public war. Julian Croft, a master of media manipulation, immediately went on the offensive. The Croft report ran a follow-up piece within hours headlined, "Cole's Crisis, Billionaire Releases Dubious Recording of Ailing Mother in Desperate Smear Campaign." The article skillfully painted Ethan as a ruthless monster, questioning the recording's authenticity, suggesting it could be a sophisticated deep fake, or worse, that he had coerced the confession from his elderly, distraught mother. Evelyn Reed, in a televised interview with a sympathetic host, wept on camera, portraying herself as the victim of a powerful family closing ranks to protect its predatory son. The public narrative was a raging torrent of speculation, and Ethan was drowning in it. His lawyers advised caution, his PR team begged for action, and his board of directors demanded a miracle. He was paying for the best doctors, the best lawyers, and the best publicists in the country, yet he felt utterly powerless. He couldn't force Clara's lungs to heal, and he couldn't force the world to see the truth through the fog of lies. The feeling of helplessness was a poison, and he knew if he let it, it would paralyze him. Late on the second night, sitting alone in his silent home office, surrounded by screens flashing with his own demonized image, he decided he was done waiting. He was done reacting. He was going to hunt. He would not fight this war on their terms. The media was their battlefield, a realm of smoke and mirrors where truth was a casualty. His battlefield was data. Cold, hard, and irrefutable. His home office, once a place of quiet work, transformed into a digital command center. He bypassed his own finance and HR departments, knowing a leak could compromise everything. This had to be a ghost operation conducted by him and him alone. Using his CEO-level credentials, he logged directly into the company's central servers, granting himself unrestricted access to every file, every transaction, every email sent since the company's inception. The first file he pulled up was Evelyn_complete. He scrolled through 7 years of history, and with his mother's confession fresh in his mind, he could finally see the story hidden between the lines. He saw glowing performance reviews, signed by her direct superiors, that coincided with the dates his mother had mentioned paying her off. He saw salary increases and bonuses that were wildly disproportionate to her role, even for a top performer. The personnel file was a map of her leverage, but he knew the company's financial records would be a map of her crimes. He opened new windows, pulling up the complete expense ledgers for the Beaumont's flagship store, a dizzying ocean of data stretching back years. For hours he found nothing. Every invoice was signed, every expense report was meticulously detailed, every supplier was legitimate. Evelyn had been brilliant, her tracks covered with layers of perfect procedure. A sliver of doubt began to creep in. What if his mother had been wrong? What if Evelyn was just a bitter employee after all? And then at 3 a.m, his eyes burning from the screen's glare, he saw it. It was a small thing, a recurring monthly payment so unremarkable it was designed to be overlooked. The vendor was listed as Vanguard Textiles. Ethan had spent his entire adult life in the apparel industry. He knew every major fabric supplier, every boutique mill, every sourcing agent in the business. He had never heard of them. He clicked the vendor ID. The invoices were for specialty material sourcing and consultation. The descriptions were vague, the purchase orders thin. And the payments, once a month like clockwork for 4 years, were always for exactly $9,500. Just $500 shy of the mandatory $10,000 threshold that would have automatically triggered a secondary review from the corporate finance office. It wasn't a mistake. It was a pattern. It was a threat. and Ethan began to pull. Vanguard Textiles became his sole focus. Pulling up a new set of search tools, he ran the company name through every state and federal business registry he could access. The company existed, but only on paper. It was a Delaware LLC, registered just over 4 years ago to a P.O. box in Wilmington. It had no physical address, no website, no public footprint. It was a ghost corporation designed to receive money, not to conduct business. The listed director was a man named Arthur Vance. The name was unfamiliar, but Ethan had a hunch. He switched back to his own company's HR archives and ran a search. The result was instantaneous. Arthur Vance, former stockroom assistant at the Beaumont, terminated 5 years ago for petty theft. A man with a criminal record and a grudge against the company, making him the perfect, controllable puppet for Evelyn's scheme. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Ethan could practically see the whole sordid affair unfold. Evelyn, in her infinite cunning, approaches the disgraced ex-employee. She offers him a generous cut to act as the paper director of a shell company. She then uses her managerial authority to create and approve a steady stream of fake invoices for non-existent goods, funneling hundreds of thousands of dollars a year from the Beaumont's operational budget directly into her own pockets. A cold, hard fury settled in Ethan's stomach. She did it once, she had done it before. His fingers flew across the keyboard, his search now surgically precise. He wasn't just looking for odd names anymore, he was hunting for the pattern. He built a query to search for all vendors incorporated in the last 5 years, with invoices consistently falling between $9,000 and $9,999, and cross-referenced their directors with his own list of terminated employees. The results flooded his screen. It was a digital landslide of corruption. He found a boutique cleaning service whose owner was a janitor fired for drinking on the job. He found a logistics consultant whose CEO was a delivery driver let go for stealing merchandise. He found a phantom marketing analytics firm run by a former sales associate who had been fired for fraud. It was an entire ecosystem of crime, a shadow company built from the ghosts of his disgraced employees, all orchestrated by Evelyn. He leaned back in his chair, the glow of the monitors illuminating his stunned face. This wasn't just embezzlement. This was a criminal empire, a parasite that had been living inside his company for years, with Evelyn as its queen. He stared at the web of interconnected fraud on his screen, a sprawling criminal enterprise hidden within his own company. The sheer scale of the embezzlement was staggering, but it raised a more urgent question. How did she operate with such impunity for so long? A fraud of this magnitude should have triggered a dozen red flags, an internal audit, an immediate investigation. Unless, of course, the person who should have been guarding the castle was the one holding the gate open. The answer, he knew with a sickening certainty, was his mother. Working with a relentless, cold focus, Ethan began constructing a new timeline. On one axis, he plotted every one of Evelyn's promotions and the incorporation dates of her various shell companies. On another, he mapped out the known interventions from his mother, the dates of the payoffs she'd confessed to, the timing of her glowing recommendations. The pattern that emerged was a chilling quid pro quo, written in the neat, passionless language of spreadsheets and financial data. Evelyn's promotion to assistant manager in 2021 was immediately followed by the creation of Vanguard Textiles. Her final, crucial appointment to flagship manager came just weeks before 3 new phantom consulting firms appeared on the company's books. His mother hadn't just been paying Evelyn for her silence. She had been giving her the keys to the vault. The financial data was the shadow, but he needed to find the object that cast it. He needed proof of the blackmail itself. He knew they wouldn't have been foolish enough to use company email. But his mother, for all her cunning, relied on a small, trusted staff. He focused on a new target, his mother's personal assistant, a woman named Doris who had retired last year after 30 years of impeccable service. He pulled her entire IT archive from the company servers. He ran a simple keyword search, Evelyn Reed. He found it almost immediately. Not an email, but the metadata of a deleted calendar invite from a private, non-company account. It was all the lead he needed. He forwarded the address to his head of cybersecurity, a man whose loyalty was beyond question, with a single urgent command: I need every piece of communication to or from this account. Break whatever encryption you have to. Now. The man worked through the night. Just before dawn, a secured file appeared in Ethan's inbox. It contained a dozen decrypted emails. He opened the first one, and the final piece of the puzzle slammed into place. The language was couched in corporate politeness, but the message was a blade pressed to his mother's throat. It read, Dear Elizabeth, I trust you are well. I was just reviewing the quarterly reports and thinking about how vital discretion is to maintaining a brand's integrity. As we both know, delicate situations like the unfortunate departure of Ms. Evans can have unforeseen consequences if not handled with perfect, ongoing care. On a related note, I do hope you'll strongly support my nomination for the upcoming manager position. I feel I've more than earned it. The first rays of the morning sun began to slice through the blinds of his office window, casting long shadows across the room. Ethan hadn't slept. He was surrounded by a fortress of glowing screens, each displaying a different piece of the sprawling conspiracy. He leaned back in his chair, the exhaustion a heavy weight on his shoulders, and for the first time he saw the entire monstrous picture in perfect, horrifying clarity. Evelyn Reed was not his mother's instrument. She was the conductor of a symphony of deceit that had been playing for 7 years. His mother, in her arrogant belief that she was the master manipulator, had been a pawn in a much larger and more lucrative game. Evelyn's initial tip-off about his affair with Clara hadn't been an act of corporate loyalty. It was her opening move. She had created a crisis, identified the key weakness in the Cole family, his mother's obsession with reputation, and then positioned herself as the sole proprietor of the solution. Every promotion, every glowing review, every time Elizabeth Cole had turned a blind eye to a questionable expense report was another ransom payment. Evelyn's final promotion to manager of the flagship store hadn't been a reward for her silence. It was the grand prize. It gave her the power, the access, and the lack of oversight she needed to escalate her criminal enterprise to an entirely new level, all under the protective shield of his mother's dark secret. And finally, he understood the true motive behind Julian Croft's venomous article. It wasn't a simple, emotional act of revenge for being fired. It was a cold, calculated, preemptive strike. Evelyn knew the moment he uttered the words, "You're fired," her blackmail leverage was gone. She knew that without his mother's protection, a financial investigation into her tenure was inevitable. The story wasn't just designed to hurt him. It was designed to utterly destroy his credibility before he even knew there was a crime to investigate. She wasn't just lashing out. She was trying to burn the entire building down to cover the tracks of her escape. This level of manipulation is almost unbelievable. She wasn't just a bully, she was a master manipulator running a criminal empire. If you think this kind of toxic, deceptive behavior has no place in the world, smash that like button. It takes 1 second to show your support, and every single like is a vote against people like Evelyn. A grim, determined smile touched Ethan's lips for the first time in days. The exhaustion was still there, a deep ache in his bones, but it was now eclipsed by a cold, energizing resolve. He began to methodically save and encrypt the files, the mountain of evidence proving a multi-million-dollar embezzlement scheme, and the decrypted emails that proved a years-long campaign of corporate extortion. The messy public war of he said, she said was over. He now possessed a weapon of pure, irrefutable, and career-ending fact. The hunt was finished. The execution was about to begin. The next morning, a different man walked into the downtown offices of Carter, Finch, and Associates. The haunted, exhausted look he had worn for the past 3 days was gone, replaced by a glacial calm that his legal team recognized as the prelude to a decisive corporate maneuver. He had showered and changed into a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, looking less like a man under siege and more like a general arriving to command a war council. His head of PR, Martha, and his lead counsel, a sharp, seasoned litigator named Benjamin Carter, were already gathered in the main conference room. They looked haggard, their table littered with empty coffee cups and printouts of Julian Croft's latest inflammatory articles. They were prepared for another grueling day of damage control and defensive strategy. They were not prepared for the man who now stood before them. "Good morning," Ethan said, his voice devoid of stress. "Forget the libel suit for a moment. Cancel the press statements. We are no longer playing defense." He walked to the head of the polished mahogany table and set down a small, encrypted hard drive. "We're ending this. Today." He plugged the drive into the room's integrated system, and the large screen at the end of the table flickered to life. The faces of his team, already weary, fell as they anticipated another rehash of the scandalous news. Instead, they were met with a series of complex spreadsheets, color-coded timelines, and financial flowcharts. With the cold, detached precision of a prosecuting attorney, Ethan walked them through 7 years of meticulously planned corporate fraud. He showed them the ghost companies, the laundered money, the padded invoices. He presented a criminal enterprise with an estimated theft of over $8 million. Then, for the finale, he opened the decrypted emails between Evelyn and his mother. The room was utterly silent as they read the veiled threats and the quiet extortion. When he was finished, Ethan looked at the stunned faces of his team. Their mouths were agape. They had walked into this meeting armed with a slingshot for a public relations war. He had just handed them a nuclear arsenal. The stunned silence in the room was finally broken by Benjamin Carter, who let out a low, predatory chuckle. The exhaustion had vanished from his face, replaced by the energized, hungry look of a shark that smells blood in the water. "My God, Ethan," he said, a grin spreading across his face. "This isn't just a defense. This is an execution." Martha, his PR head, was practically vibrating with excitement. "An execution? Ben, this is a silver bullet wrapped in a nuclear bomb. We leak this. No. We give it as an exclusive to the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal. The whole story. The multi-million-dollar embezzlement, the blackmail, the decrypted emails. Julian Croft and Evelyn Reed will be radioactive before lunch. The narrative doesn't just flip, it implodes. Predator billionaire becomes CO uncovers massive criminal conspiracy. We can't lose this. We control the story from this moment on." "She's right," Carter agreed, nodding emphatically. "It's the fastest, most effective way to end the public relations nightmare. We shape the leak, we frame the narrative. The civil suits for defamation and the recovery of the stolen funds will be a mere formality after the public has crucified them." Ethan listened patiently, letting them map out the conventional, media-savvy strategy. When they were finished, he raised a hand and they fell silent. He gave a single decisive shake of his head. "No." The word, quiet but absolute, hung in the air, instantly extinguishing their excitement. "No leaks," Ethan continued, his voice firm. "No exclusives. I will not engage Julian Croft and Evelyn Reed on their battlefield. I will not fight a media war, even one I am guaranteed to win. Giving this to the press turns it into another spectacle. It invites debate. It leaves a sliver of room for the cynics to claim I fabricated the evidence to save myself. I am not interested in winning the news cycle." He looked at each member of his team, his eyes as hard as granite. "Evelyn Reed didn't just lie about me. She ran a criminal enterprise out of my company and engaged in felony extortion. This is not a PR problem anymore. This is a matter for the district attorney. We're not going to win in the court of public opinion. We are going to win in a court of law." The team's stunned silence quickly morphed into a profound respect. This was not the standard playbook. This was a statement. Ethan wasn't just trying to clear his name. He was seeking to recalibrate the scales of justice itself. 3 hours later, the sterile glass and steel environment of his lawyer's office was replaced by the solemn wood-paneled chambers of the Cook County District Attorney. They sat across a large oak desk from DA Isabella Hernandez, a formidable woman in her 50s with a hard-earned reputation for being ruthlessly tough on white-collar crime and completely immune to political pressure. Her expression was impartial as they began, ready to hear yet another story of a wealthy man being inconvenienced. Benjamin Carter laid out the legal framework, but it was Ethan who took the lead. He spoke with a calm, factual authority, not as a victim, but as a citizen reporting a series of major felonies. He presented the meticulously documented timeline, the clear-as-day financial fraud, and the damning, undeniable proof of extortion. DA Hernandez's impartial demeanor slowly shifted as the mountain of evidence grew. She leaned forward, her eyes sharp with the focused interest of a prosecutor who has just been handed a career-defining, airtight case. "This is remarkably thorough, Mr. Cole," she said when he had finished, her voice betraying a hint of admiration. She closed the thick file his team had prepared. "We will, of course, have to verify every detail, but based on the evidence you've presented here today, my office will be petitioning a judge for warrants by the end of the day. We will pursue this matter with the full and considerable force of the law." It was done. The power of the state was now aligned with him. As Ethan and his team stepped out of the courthouse and into the bright afternoon sun, he felt the immense, suffocating weight that had been crushing him for days finally begin to lift. The buzz of his phone in his pocket, which had once been a source of constant dread, now felt like irrelevant, distant noise. The public firestorm, the trending hashtags, Julian Croft's poisonous words, none of it mattered anymore. They were ghosts, specters in a war that had already been won, they just didn't know it yet. He pulled out his phone, ignoring the cascade of news alerts and missed calls from his frantic PR team. He navigated to his recent calls and pressed a single number. The CEO was gone. The corporate warrior was gone. There was only the father, the man whose real battle was still being fought in the quiet, sterile halls of a hospital. "Hello," he said, his voice softer than it had been all day. "This is Ethan Cole. I'm calling for an update on Clara Evans." The turn of the tide was not a gradual shift, it was a tidal wave. It began not with a leak or a whisper, but with the full, unassailable authority of the state. At a packed press conference, District Attorney Isabella Hernandez laid out the facts. She spoke of a multi-year, multi-million-dollar embezzlement scheme and a calculated campaign of felony extortion. She presented the case with cold, undeniable clarity, and the media frenzy that had been tearing Ethan apart instantly turned on its creators. The story of Ethan Cole the Predator was vaporized, replaced by the story of Evelyn Reed the criminal mastermind and Julian Croft the reckless journalistic hitman. The consequences were swift and spectacular. The montage played out on news screens across the country. First, the raid on Evelyn Reed's pristine, minimalist apartment. The heavy thud of a battering ram against her reinforced door, the chaos of armed officers swarming her sanctuary of cold order. The final iconic image was of Evelyn, her face a mask of incandescent fury, being led out in handcuffs, her silk bathrobe a pathetic replacement for her usual armor of designer clothes. Next, the sleek, glass-walled offices of the Croft Report were breached. Julian Croft, the smug digital assassin, was shown with his hands flat against a wall, his predatory smirk finally gone, replaced by the pale, slack-jawed look of a man whose own trap had just snapped shut on him. Servers were seized, files were confiscated, and his empire of lies was dismantled before a live television audience. He would later be indicted as a co-conspirator, his career not just over but annihilated. The fate of Elizabeth Cole was a quieter, more somber affair. There were no raids, no public humiliation. Instead, a single stark image showed her walking up the courthouse steps, looking frail and diminished, her lawyer at her side. A news anchor's voiceover explained that in exchange for her full and immediate testimony against Evelyn Reed, the DA's office had agreed to a plea deal. She would face massive financial penalties and a lengthy term of community service, but would avoid prison time. It was a punishment tempered with a sliver of mercy, a quiet acknowledgement from Ethan that he sought justice, not the complete destruction of his own mother. The headlines fade. The seasons turn. The brutal Chicago winter gives way to the tentative warmth of spring, and then to the full, vibrant green of summer. 8 months after the arrests, the legal battles are over, the news cycle has moved on, and the world has forgotten. But in a sun-drenched house in a quiet, tree-lined suburb, a new world is just beginning. This home is nothing like Ethan's old, cavernous mansion. It's filled with light, laughter, and the happy, chaotic clutter of family life. Children's drawings are held by magnets on the refrigerator, a half-finished Lego castle sits on the living room rug, and the faint, sweet smell of baking cookies hangs in the air. Clara, now fully recovered, is the vibrant, smiling woman of Ethan's memories. The harrowing ordeal has left a new depth in her eyes, but it is a look of resilience and profound peace. She watches from the kitchen as Ethan, a man completely transformed, lies on the floor, patiently helping Grace click a puzzle piece into place. He is no longer the titan of industry. He is simply Daddy, a role he has embraced with all the focus and devotion he once reserved for his empire. On the sofa, Faith, ever the serious one, is absorbed in a book, while Hope hums quietly to herself as she draws a riot of colorful flowers at the dining table. Clara walks over to Ethan, placing a hand on his shoulder. He looks up at her, his smile genuine and free of the weight he carried for so long. They share a look that says everything, of battles won, of gratitude, and of a future they almost lost. Grace looks up from her puzzle, her brown eyes, so much like her mother's, full of a simple, happy certainty. "Daddy," she asks, her voice clear as a bell, "are you staying home for dinner tonight?" Ethan reaches out and pulls her into a gentle hug, his heart full. He looks at Clara, then at his other 2 daughters, his entire world now contained within these 4 walls. "Yes, sweetie," he says, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm staying home for every dinner." 1 year later, on a perfect sun-drenched Saturday afternoon, the man pushing a giggling 4-year-old on a swing in Lincoln Park bore little resemblance to the titan of industry named Ethan Cole. That man had worn his tailored suits like armor and his ambition like a crown. This man wore faded blue jeans and a simple gray sweater, and his only ambition at this moment was to get the swing just high enough to elicit a squeal of pure joy from his youngest daughter. "Higher, Daddy, higher," Grace shouted, her little legs kicking at the sky. Ethan laughed, a sound that was now as natural to him as breathing, and gave the swing another powerful push. Nearby, Faith and Hope were struggling with a large, dragon-shaped kite whose string had become a hopeless tangle. After a moment, Ethan slowed Grace's swing and went over to them. "Looks like this dragon is a little tied up," he said, kneeling on the grass. The man who once untangled multi-million-dollar corporate mergers now patiently worked at the tiny, stubborn knots in a kite string. He was no longer solving problems for profit or power. He was solving them for the simple, profound reward of seeing his daughter's smiles. Watching them from a nearby bench was Clara. The harrowing ordeal of the previous year was a distant storm, and she had emerged into the sunlight, healthy and vibrant. She watched the man she loved and the children she had fought so hard for, and a look of deep, serene peace settled on her face. As Ethan finally freed the kite string and looked up, his eyes found hers across the lawn. They shared a smile, a silent conversation that spoke of a shared past, a grateful present, and a peaceful future they had built together from the ashes of their old lives. Later that evening, the joyful energy of the park settled into the comfortable, warm hum of their home. This house, a beautiful brownstone they had chosen together, was the complete antithesis of Ethan's old mansion. The mansion had been a museum of glass and steel, silent and sterile. This house was a home filled with the happy chaos of family life. Mismatched mugs sat by the sink, a sprawling board game was left half-played on the living room floor, and the air was filled with the delicious scent of Clara's cooking. The heart of the home was the large, open-plan kitchen. At the sturdy wooden table in the center, Ethan sat between Faith and Hope, helping them with their first-grade homework. He patiently explained a math problem to Hope while Faith proudly read a sentence aloud from her favorite book. The scene was simple, ordinary, and to Ethan, it was the most extraordinary thing in the world. As the camera pans slowly over this scene of domestic bliss, Ethan's voice, warm and reflective, begins. 4 years I built an empire of glass and steel. I measured my life in stock prices and market shares, in acquisitions and profits. The camera captures Grace, who has finished her drawing, running over to show it to him. He pulls her onto his lap with a kiss to her forehead, never missing a beat with Hope's math problem. I decorated my life with expensive art and empty rooms. I thought I had everything. But I had nothing. The camera settles on Clara, who is leaning against the doorframe, a loving smile on her face as she watches her family. Ethan looks up and catches her eye, his own gaze full of a love so deep it needs no words. He turns his attention back to his daughters, who are all laughing at a funny face he's made. The camera pulls back, framing the 5 of them in the warm, golden light of the kitchen. Now, I have everything. The final shot is of the whole family together, caught in a perfect, candid moment of laughter and love, truly and finally complete.